From Volkswagen to the Center for Medical Progress to Carly Fiorina, trust seems to be a commodity that's a little hard to come by these days.
Trust and the truth. They're kind of slippery. They're hard to hang on to once you have them.
That's what we're talking about
right.
today on Talking Point Live. Stay with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
There is a place where the desert comes alive, where rain breaks forth from solid stone and gardens spring from blistered rock. There is a place with enough color to make a rainbow jealous, where boulders are bigger than buildings and cliffs are higher than clouds. There is a place that will straighten your step, tighten your grip, widen your eyes, and open your jaw. There is a place.
Community Education Channel, serving Washington County for 20 years, covering DSU athletics, local high school events, city councils, the Economic Summit, Chamber of Commerce meetings, community events like Washington City Veterans Day celebration, and much more. Visit cectvutah.com for broadcast schedule and more information.
It's there we go. Good morning. It's Wednesday, September 30th, 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. And this is Talking Point Live. I'm Eric Young.
And I'm Jennifer Kohler, and we're coming to you live from the Dixie State University campus.
Which I have to say, kudos to our grounds personnel here who go through and keep this institution in tip-top shape. And early fall seems to be probably one of the best times to peruse this campus and take a look around. We're very happy to be here.
Right.
And as always, well, first off, it's great to be back with you here. We've been away for a couple of weeks.
We have been. We had homecoming to contend with.
Yep, things going on that way.
Busy schedule for our crew here at CEC.
But it's nice to be back here.
Yeah, same here.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
There. I should also mention, as I'm getting into the habit of doing on every show, the views and opinions expressed on Talking Point Live really just belong to Jennifer Kohler and myself.
Right.
They don't represent the CEC nor the Dixie State University.
Right, and you know, one thing we were talking about not too long ago was what kind of value does this program provide to our community? And so we would like to encourage people to go onto our Facebook page and indicate if you think the program has some value and what kind of value it has for you. We believe that it's a nice alternative to some of the content that you are force-fed on the networks, and we'd like to know what you think. So don't hesitate to let us know, please.
And we hope to do a little teaching along the way, somehow give you the ability to identify bias within reporting and to look at credibility, especially during election time. I want to say an election year, but that's maybe too optimistic. But to be able to identify why we resonate with certain candidates and why we don't with others, and how maybe sometimes that resonance could be false or based on false principles or false ideas, which is what we're talking about today.
Right. Like, so who do you trust and what's the truth?
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Or truthiness, as Colbert would have said at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. What does he mean by that, actually?
Well, that, like we were talking before, there are various shades, it seems, of truth when it comes to politics.
Okay.
And how do we go through and figure that out?
So you're saying there can be shades of truth. That's an interesting concept.
Well, I personally don't believe in that. Either it is or it isn't.
Okay. Well, and you know, one word that comes up for truth is accuracy to me.
Sure.
An accurate reflection of reality. That's my definition of truth. And I can see that things can be more or less accurate. I mean, you can have a partial accuracy, so maybe you can have a partial truth.
Well, that's kind of the argument that Carly
Yeah.
Fiorina is using
Okay.
to back up what she said in the last presidential debate, where
Right.
she indicated that there was a certain part of the footage from in the highly edited Planned Parenthood video that had a certain scene that showed the deconstruction of a fetus, and it's not there. I spent 4 hours a couple of days ago going through the 12-hour video. I skipped 2 parts and just looked at for the actual images that were in there, and again, I couldn't find anything.
So did you look at the abortion video
I
that
did.
was in question? You know,
Yeah.
I really could not bring myself to look at it.
Well, it's not recommended viewing by any stretch of the imagination,
Wow.
but it's not as, boy, this sounds pretty callous on my part. It's not as horrible as one might think it is, and it's just
Okay.
a few moments when it's up on screen. Outside of that, it's just those involved in the Planned Parenthood interview. I can't call it an interview because it's so edited that they've twisted the context of
Okay.
the truth of that.
So the procedure itself is a small part of what you were looking at?
Well, I was looking for what Carly Fiorina had actually called out in the debate and what
Okay.
she has since defended with
Okay.
pundits and Sunday morning
Okay.
television. And frankly, it's still not there, even though she says, well, even though it might not be represented in the video, it still happens. And I don't think that's what's at question. We
Yeah.
know that there are still horrible partial birth abortions, things like that going on.
Yeah.
But it still harks back to Carly Fiorina's misrepresentation.
Of that
so she says,
particular
well,
video.
it's going on, so there's still some truth in what it is that I'm saying. What
Okay.
she said was, it's in the video, it's in a
Right.
place where you can go and look and come to find out she's
It's
wrong.
not.
It's
It's
not.
not. Okay.
So is that continuum of truthiness?
Well,
then?
okay, so I have a question. So if a person, I know a lie is a deliberate falsehood. Can a person be lying if they think what they're saying is true? Or is that different than a lie? Is that misinformation or misspeaking?
Well, we
do you
can see
think?
the power of conviction go through and
Yeah.
convince somebody that they are speaking in the truth. We see that in high content cultures in religion,
Okay.
where there's that conviction and they
Yeah.
and they know. I watched
They
this
believe it's the truth.
brilliant documentary on Scientology,
Okay.
something that is so aloof, dare I say, so crazy, and yet there are millions who have bought into that idea thinking that it is indeed the truth. And
Right,
so
right.
there's that emotional resonance that I talked about at the top of the show that I think enables or disables people to realize where are they falling on that continuum of what's truth and what's not.
So you're saying the presence of passion can present itself as the
Absolutely.
truth.
If
Yes.
you already have an automatic attitudinal response about, say, Carly Fiorina, if you like her, and you know what, she became the Republican darling. She shined at the beginning of the debate, on the second debate. The first
Right.
one, she had no place on stage, and then
Right.
suddenly she came up, and a lot of progressives, right-wing progressives, wanted Carly Fiorina to go through and plow right through that debate. She put Donald Trump in his place. And then when it came down to Planned Parenthood, man, she just shot herself in the foot. But because we like Carly Fiorina and because of what she represents, we have a tendency to maybe overlook the infraction of lying and still say, well, I still think, she's a viable candidate. She hasn't lost my trust because I trust her on so many other levels or so many other issues or where she stands on her campaign.
Right. Well, a couple of things come up. You mentioned for what she represents. And so I want to touch on that. But one thing that occurs to me as I was watching her insist in a very passionate way that these abortions, late-term abortions, are happening, I thought to myself, okay, it's a little soundbite, and I didn't see like an extended interview.
Right.
But if I were her, I would say, if you want documentation for the claims I'm making, in a very passionate way, here's where you can go for documentation and for backup.
So she to self-reference that way.
Right, and so to support my case, and here's some evidence that I'm basing my opinion on. And if the evidence proves to be faulty, then I will change my opinion. But right now, based on this evidence, this is what I'm convinced. That way, I realize it's a little bit of a disclaimer. But then a lot of times, we are making statements based on the best information we have at hand, and we trust people to provide us with accurate information.
But
so
you had indicated that she would change her opinion, and that's not what's at stake here with Carly Fiorina.
Right.
I don't think anybody's asking her to change her position on Planned Parenthood.
Right.
What they're asking her to do is come clean with the fact that she lied about the content, the information there.
She claims she saw and heard something that in fact does not exist.
Does not exist.
Right.
There. And there's a lot that is very misrepresented within the edited video of Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
Enough to become, and it's going to every election season anyway, it's become a voting issue. It's become an issue now upon which the livelihood of government employees is at stake as we look at another government shutdown in the wake of being able to, or not being able to, shut down Planned Parenthood or defund Planned Parenthood.
Now, my impression was that language did not get inserted into the legislation that they're having to pass.
They're still rattling their sabers along that line, unfortunately, to use that as kind of a battle cry to change minds. What's most disconcerting about that is the video itself is misleading to begin with.
Right.
And independent investigations have gone through and taken a look at Planned Parenthood's method of operations, and they do not sell fetal tissues. They do what they can to cover their costs, but they're not going through and capitalizing on what's going on. I've spent plenty of time to go through and vet this out and find out for myself. And I'm not asking you to go through and believe me. I'm asking you to go through and take a look at the issue, vet it yourself.
Okay, now
take a look at where those sources are coming from.
Okay, now you have invested a lot of time in, like you said, vetting this issue for yourself. Can you maybe on our Facebook page provide some links to save a little bit of time on this research process?
But we have to realize we're still framing.
Right.
We'll take a look at this link, take a look at this.
Yeah.
We're still suggesting where to go, where really what we want to teach is create the critical questions in your own mind to figure out what the primary source is on this information, and then go find the primary source.
Yeah, but a lot of people, to be realistic, a lot of people do not have the time.
See, I'm going to reject that as an argument here, because you know what? If you want to be completely vetted on this, you need to take the time. If you want to vote your conscience and understand completely what's at risk and what the stakes are and what the value is of anybody's platform, you need to go through and vet it and find out what's going on. And the best place to do that is at a primary source. We're up against a break here.
Okay.
We'll be back in 60 seconds on this one with Talking Point Live. We're going to come back and talk about primary sources.
Okay.
And then get into this idea of skepticism and assumptions, right?
Yeah, and primary source, I want to talk a little bit about Ben Carson and the brouhaha over his comments and how primary source figures into that.
Brouhaha coming up in 60 seconds. We'll be right back.
There is a place where rocks bleed and nature blushes on a battlefield green with envy, where dimples determine destiny and a tiny wooden T holds the outcome in the balance. There is a place where friends are opponents and opponents are friends, where the prize is elusive, the conquest is captivating, and the score isn't settled till the drinks are down. There is a place.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
With us this Wednesday morning.
We're going to be talking about some more about truth and trust, and we're going to be talking about how primary sources figure in to your ability to discover the truth and to establish the credibility or a trust based on somebody's comments. Okay, and should we talk about Ben Carson as an example?
Sure.
Okay.
The whole context of Ben Carson, he indicated during a talk show that perhaps a Muslim would not be best suited to be the president of the United States. And all kinds of uproar happened with that.
It really did cause a reaction. And one thing that was interesting to me is in my Wednesday public discourse class, I asked my students, first of all, what their reaction to that statement of Carson's was, and I had two major responses. One was they really weren't clued in to what I was asking.
They had no idea.
They had really no idea.
No context for that.
And the other students that had an opinion had a very passionate opinion. But when I asked them, have you actually seen the video segment where the question is posed and he offers the answer, of the students with the opinions, no one had actually seen the footage, which is kind of amazing because it
So where did they
wasn't
get their
hard to
opinions
find.
from to begin with?
Okay, I had one student said, you know, on my Facebook page, the headline came up about Carson's response, and I didn't want to dignify that response or dignify that comment or waste my time watching him make those offensive comments. And we talked about it in the course, and I played the video for my class. And so what does that have to do with primary sources then?
Well, they
video.
didn't consider a primary source,
Right.
so they never watched it to begin with.
Right.
If all they did was depend on a Facebook headline to go
Someone
through
else's
and
interpretation. Yeah.
again resonate with their already embedded automatic attitude about it,
Right.
then they're not going to go through and be open-minded to the primary source.
Right. So the primary source being the video clip is where you want to start, and you want to have a little context around that whole statement he made. You want to see what the question was, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we mean by primary sources. Did you have anything else on primary sources you're thinking?
Well, as claims are being made and we're wondering where they might be coming from, vet it. Take a look if it's done through a viable news service. And let me give you a little hint about viable news services and what's happening on the internet. If there's nothing but clickbait on the bottom of the page, it's probably not a dependable news source, and it might be time to move on to something else.
And what do we mean by clickbait for people who are not, comfortable with that lingo, for example?
Well, clickbait is anything that harks out to you that says, this happened and you're not going to believe what happened next.
Bizarre.
Some kind of hook that gets you
Yes.
away from the content that you went there to find to begin
Right.
with. Lots of
Extreme, bizarre, crazy statements.
just ridiculous
right?
things.
Yes.
And there are lots of news services out there that have a tendency to go through and allow that type of action to happen on their pages. To me, that discredits them. They lose their credibility as a viable source to go through and find something that actually has some truth to it, or to get to a primary source.
Right.
So as a consumer of news, I have to ask myself, where are they getting this information? Who did the interview? What's their trustworthiness? Who are my most trustworthy journalists that are out there?
Right.
Those working in the hopefully the fourth estate, to make sure that we have a complete and comprehensive understanding of the issues that are going on.
Right, and even venerable sources like the New York Times, as we know from the past, they can even have false reports
journalists
that show
make
up.
mistakes,
Right.
certainly.
And they have to reestablish trust with the public again
Right.
once those mistakes happen.
We are the new producers when it comes to social media. It's not up to some producer with NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, Fox News, whomever. We are the producers. We have to go through and say, okay, let's roll tape here and make sure I got it from the right source. Let's look at an unbiased source over in this section. What is the worldview of the same issue that we might be considering? We got to get away from trusting anybody else to go through and frame that information for us.
Well, and you bring up the point about trust in that respect, and I'm thinking even when you have trust, for example, you and I got into a conversation over Ben Carson's comments,
Right.
and it degenerated, and you felt like I wasn't respecting your opinion, and I think it affected the trust level we had for one another until you called me out on that and you told me how I was being and how you were reacting to my statements to you. So even when you have trust with somebody in a relationship, sometimes it can be broken unintentionally by the other party, and it takes effort to clean it up, and it takes what I'm calling compassionate accountability. So in the sense that you were holding me accountable for being the way that I was, right? But you were compassionate when you did it. And I think this compassionate accountability is something we could apply to our news sources and to our candidates running for office, to everybody in our life, really. We want to hold people accountable for what they say. We want to have them be accurate. We want to have them be honest. And we want to be able to trust them. And when they don't live up to those expectations and that standard, We want to call them on it, and we want to be compassionate about it and realize they're humans and they do make mistakes.
But we're just not, and I appreciate your comment that
Yeah.
way, but we're just not seeing compassion outside of perhaps just this type of civil dialogue happening between two
Right.
people who do a lot of research and talk about things.
Right.
We don't see that compassionate questioning happening, say, within the news on virtually any level. Or when it is used, say if we're using a news pundit as a moderator in a debate, then the nation turns around and says, well, you can't call them out like Candy, CNN's
Oh, the lady that was at the anchoring the debate?
Crowley. It was
Yeah.
the Mitt Romney and Barack Obama debate, and
Yeah.
she called out Mitt Romney on a
Yeah.
lie during the debate, and
Yeah.
people threw their arms up and said, you shouldn't be doing that.
Okay.
So my
Interjecting yourself
Yeah.
into the conversation.
Who is
yeah.
the compassionate moderator
Yeah.
then outside of ourselves? Is that not the role of the fourth estate to go through and call that out?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm thinking of Brian Williams, who is now being
He's back.
back in the lineup, okay, after having to be out on the bench in the penalty box for a
For
while.
lying
right? Right?
about his
right?
reporting
And
service.
so I applaud the fact that he had his time out. He had time to think about, you know, what his mistakes were, and we're going to offer him now a chance to reestablish the credibility that he had before.
So
I like that.
Can we trust him again, do you think?
Well, I think it takes a while to rebuild the trust. And so we have to look at ourselves, you know, how do we go about vetting the truth and what do we rely on? What are our resources, our mental resources?
Okay.
Yeah. So how do you go about it?
Well, we try to go through it and separate what we feel from what we think. Because that feely bit, we like it. We can depend on that. There's some certainty in trusting our own emotions with that. But our emotions can be played upon on so many different levels when it comes to somebody's charisma, with their character and their competency in putting that out there. Witness Donald Trump, for example. If you were to go through
I
and
thought
do,
we
I
weren't
know,
gonna say
but
his
I have to bring this up.
Oh, boy.
If we were to go through and do an inventory of our own personal values and put them up against the inventory of Trump's values, at least how he's been represented in the media, we're going to find lots of dissonance. We're not going to find a lot of agreement going on there because he's removed. He's charismatic, that resonates with us. He's saying things that nobody else has said before, and we like that idea of him being so anti-establishment that we choose to go through and ignore that this guy is bereft of any other values that really portray us as Americans.
Well, you know, I find it interesting because I think his appeal that you said is he's saying things that are not typically said. And sometimes when somebody is un-PC, you know, not politically correct, not smooth, and
But it's not a matter of political correctness. He's just plain rude.
well, we take that though as the truth.
We like it.
Like, oh, that person is brave enough to tell the truth. And being rude is not synonymous with being honest. We need to get that clear, I think, in our brains. Okay, and another thing is that we are really tired of being lied to by politicians, and I think we think that happens a lot. And frankly, the older I get, the more I believe that. And that's one reason I was so upset about the reaction to Ben Carson. I felt like he was speaking his version of the truth, and then the character assassination, the vilification starts, and I felt like that was an unfair reaction.
But the character assassination,
Yeah.
Nobody went through and dug any dirt up on Ben Carson. They went through and disagreed with his position that a Muslim should not be considered as for the presidency of the United States.
Right. Well, the morning that I was all hot and bothered about it was I had listened to a BBC interview
Right.
with 4 experts from the United States being interviewed on that comment. And there was, particularly by a prominent spokesman on the show, there was a lot of character assassination. You know, he's a bigot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's a hater,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
But,
So,
but you're
yeah.
getting that from one source.
I'm getting that from the BBC thing that I heard. So I guess I was assuming if I was on the BBC interview, there was going to be more of it out there in the landscape. But
given the drama of that situation and how people have a tendency
Yeah.
to go through and polarize it, it probably was a safe assumption to go
Yeah.
through and say,
Yeah.
well, everybody's calling Carson a bigot in that respect.
Right.
I disagree just from a standpoint of constitutional principles and the Bill of Rights
Right.
in terms of we can, well, I'm like, do we want to get into this argument going back and forth?
for you, it was a constitutional issue. For
Right.
me, it was wanting to understand the tenets of Islam better, and having some confusion. And I actually had to dig last night doing
Right.
a little research. I had to dig and dig and dig through many pages of results, okay, to find something that was even remotely of value on this topic.
Okay, now I have to say,
Okay.
and I'll probably put this up on our website
Yeah.
as well.
Right.
Well, for our director's information, we'll skip the break and just move on through this since we're so engaged at this point.
Okay.
Jen put up a website that dealt with vetting Ben Carson's comments and got into the interview and talked about the validity of his position and the actual words that he used. And as I looked up the link, I noticed first off the website is a Christian website.
Right.
The first two tabs on their page are deal with why Jesus and something to do with faith. And so I didn't disregard it. Okay.
But your skepticism.
My skepticism went up a couple of notches.
Yeah.
I thought, okay,
Right.
and it suddenly shaded
Right.
what I was looking for. And what I
Yes.
started to look for within the body of that text was how did their Christian bias go through and maybe malign what was happening with Ben Carson. I read the whole thing, and you know what? I couldn't find a bias. It was good reporting. And so with that, I thought, okay, I'll go ahead and post this
Okay.
on our Facebook
Okay,
page
good.
for everybody else to read, to go
Good.
through and see what's going
Because
on.
it does explain the complexity and the nuances in
Right.
Sharia law, for example, and the practice of Islam.
But there's an assumption that's being made there with Ben Carson, and I think he was called out on that later on.
Okay.
And that assumption is, if you are a Muslim, then you must automatically be practicing Sharia law, and that's not the case. So, and that's where I think a lot of people went through and wanted to hold Ben Carson to that comment and say,
Yeah.
no, that's not entirely accurate.
Yeah. And
Because
see, I didn't get the automatic practicing out of it.
the automatic,
Yeah,
the
automatic.
assumption,
Yeah, I didn't get the assumption of the automatic practicing. I got the
the automatic attitude.
What I got was that's a real issue to be dealt with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Before you vote for that person.
Then-
Not that they can't run, but before you vote. Yeah.
Then why didn't that issue come up with Mitt Romney?
Well, maybe it did for people.
We never saw it, though.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
looked for that.
Yeah.
I looked to see.
Yeah.
Because within the Mormon faith, there is this idea of conscripting yourself to a higher law
Yeah.
as well. Not much different than what's happening with, this is going to get some emails and newsletters, not all that different from Sharia law
Yeah.
there as it goes.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's talk about
Skepticism you wanted to mention,
Yeah, that's
yes.
what we'll get into.
Yeah.
The fifth agreement, by the way, with Don Miguel Ruiz, after the
Okay.
4 agreements he came out with, be skeptic. We're seeing the millennials, one of their main traits as we're looking at both the social and maybe some anthropological study of millennial attitudes, the very first one that comes to mind is that they're skeptical, meaning that they're not going to take anything hook, line, and sinker.
That's
They're going to
good.
go through and be critical and vet it and see what's going on.
You know, that's a hard one for me because I was raised to believe people are basically honest and to give people the benefit of the doubt. And it's been really hard for me as I've gotten older to actually be more skeptical. And the more I learn about the world, the more skeptical I become. And I think that's a great place to be. Not
Well,
cynical, but skeptical.
There's even some cultural tenets that way that indicate once an authority has spoken, the thinking has been done. And you and I have both survived several generations where we can't endure that anymore. So now we have this concept a little bit more crystallized, a little bit more practice, hopefully. It's certainly one that we need to be involved with as we vet who's going to be the next Republican presidential candidate.
Right.
Which brings me to John Kasich.
John Kasich, we didn't get to mention him, but real quickly, he made a claim that when he left Congress, that the United States had a $5 trillion surplus. And he got called on that one, and he missed one little word. It was a $5 trillion projected surplus over the next upcoming 10 years between 2000 and 2010, and that's if everything goes well.
But out of all of the presidential Republican candidates, though, Kasich is the one who is the most trustworthy. And there's a level of credibility that I'm using to go through and make that assessment. And that's what we're going to be talking about on Talking Point Live next week on the 7th of October.
That's
Is that
right.
the date
That's
for that?
right.
All right, well, it looks like we're out of time. Thank you for joining us for Talking Point Live. If you have something to add to the conversation, please find us on facebook.com/Talking Point Live. Add your comment there, and we'd be glad to get back to you. Jen, it's good to be back with
Thanks,
you.
Eric.
All right. Have a nice week.